Shalom, my friends, and welcome to this week's news. Wars and rumors of wars. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not frightened or troubled, for this must take place. Matthew chapter 24, verse 6. With the crisis in Gaza, the rise of Islamist militants in Iraq and Syria, and the international standoff going on in the Ukraine, it looks like the entire world is at war. And experts believe this is actually almost universally the case, according to a think tank which produces one of the world's leading measures of global peacefulness. Of all the countries covered by the IEP's latest study, that's the Institute for Economics and Peace, just 11 out of 162 countries were not involved in a conflict of one kind or another. Worse still, the world as a whole has been getting incrementally less peaceful every year since 2007. Sharply bucking a trend that has seen a global move away from conflict since the end of World War II. The UK, as an example, is relatively free from internal conflict, making it easy to fall into thinking it exists in a state of peace. But recent involvement in foreign fighting in the likes of Afghanistan, as well as a fairly high state of militarization, means Britain actually scores quite poorly on the 2014 Global Peace Index, coming in at number 47. Then there are countries which are involved in no actual foreign wars involving deaths whatsoever, like North Korea, but are fraught by the most divisive and entrenched internal conflicts imaginable. The only countries to achieve the lowest score for all forms of conflict were Switzerland, Japan, Qatar, Mauritius, Uruguay, Chile, Botswana, Costa Rica, Vietnam, Panama, and Brazil. But even those countries are not entirely exempt from other problems that the IEP says could lend to conflict further down the line. In Brazil and Costa Rica, for example, the level of internal conflict may be the lowest possible, but civilian access to small arms and the likelihood of violent demonstrations are worryingly high. Switzerland is famously detached when it comes to any external conflict and has a very low risk of internal problems of any kind. But it loses a number of points on the overall index because of its proportionately huge rate of arms exports. Further, the Global Peace Index measures the latest data up to the end of the year before, meaning that the state of international conflict right now is actually worse than the study suggests. In the last 12 months alone, we have seen a large increase in terrorist activity, a resurgence of conflict in Gaza, and no resolution to the crisis in Syria and Iraq. Outside of the Middle East, civil unrest in the Ukraine has turned into armed rebellion, and there has been increasing violence in South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Turning to Israel, the building of the third temple is being talked about like never before, my friends. Since the rebirth of Israel as a nation in 1948, Jews worldwide are even more keenly aware of the absence of a Jerusalem temple for Jews to worship in. Now, after almost 2,000 years of having no temple, construction of the third temple is a thriving dialogue amongst Jews everywhere. Prophetically, this is right on time with all the end-time prophecies which have divinely been lining up together. The Jerusalem Temple Mount will become the world's hottest location and focal point in the news and world events of these end times, and it is sacred to the three religions who desire the legal rights to the mount: Judaism, Islam, and the Roman Catholic Church. The burden or oracle, the thing to be lifted up of the word of Yahweh concerning Israel. Thus says Yahweh, who stretches out the heavens and lays the foundation of the earth and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I am about to make Jerusalem a cup of reeling to all the peoples round about, and in the siege against Jerusalem will there also be a siege against and upon Judah. And in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all peoples. All who lift it or burden themselves with it shall be sorely wounded. And all the nations of the earth shall come and gather together against it. In that day, says Yahweh, I will smite every horse of the armies that contend against Jerusalem with terror and panic, and his rider with madness, and I will open my eyes and regard with favor the house of Judah, and will smite every horse of the opposing nations with blindness. Zechariah, that's Zechariah, chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. And by the way, my friends, when you see horses in the scriptures, that could be anything, any form of transportation. When you see arrows mentioned, that could be any kind of a projectile, bullets, rockets, and so on. When you see bows, that could be anything that launches projectiles. Getting back to our topic, the Temple Institute has created a $100,000 Indiegogo campaign to build the third temple. Building the temple, says the Indiegogo campaign statement, would, quote, usher in a new era of universal harmony and peace, close quote, as prophesied in the Bible. Quote, it is not enough to wait and pray for the third temple, they add. It is a biblical obligation to build it, close quote. According to Rabbi Chaim Richman, the Institute's international director, the temple would stand in the present location of the Dome of the Rock, a Muslim shrine. Muslims revere the mount as the Haram al-Sharif, or noble sanctuary. But the exact location of where the temple is supposed to sit has been a topic of dispute for many years, and the Temple Mount has been the scene of confrontation in recent weeks, where Palestinian groups have repeatedly protested Jewish groups visiting the mount. Rebuilding the temple may be the next step to Israel's current military operation in the Gaza Strip. According to Islamic tradition, the Dome of the Rock, built in 691, marks the spot where Muhammad ascended to heaven. But according to Jewish tradition, Mount Moriah, or Moriah, now under the Dome of the Rock, is where the temple's Holy of Holies was situated. Until now, Jewish tradition has assumed that destruction of the Dome of the Rock was a precondition for the building of the third temple. However, in an article that appeared in 2007 in Tehumin, an influential journal of Jewish law, Frankel, a young scholar, presented a different opinion. His main argument is that Jewish doctrine regarding the rebuilding of the temple emphasizes the role of a prophet. This prophet would have extraordinary authority, including the discretion to specify the temple's precise location, regardless of any diverging Jewish traditions. Frankel considers the scenario of a holy revelation given to an authentic prophet that the temple be rebuilt on the current or an extended Temple Mount in peaceful proximity to the Dome and other houses of prayer such as the Aqsa Mosque and nearby Christian shrines. However, both Muslims and Jews have expressed opposition to that initiative. Sheikh Abdullah Nimar Darwish, founder of the Islamic movement in Israel, said it was pointless to talk about what would happen when the Mahdi, the Muslim equivalent to the Messiah, and whom I believe will be the lawless one, commonly known as the Antichrist, would reveal himself. He says, quote, "Why are we taking upon ourselves the responsibility to decide such things? Even Jews believe that it is prohibited to rebuild the temple until the Messiah comes. So what is there to talk about? The Mahdi will decide whether or not to rebuild the temple," close quote. And that is my personal belief, my friends, that the lawless one, the Antichrist, the Mahdi, will do just that. We are living in very exciting times. Turning to Gaza, the tunnels were a main strength that Hamas employed against the Israeli army, despite Israel's preparation and success in destroying a large number of them, particularly those located along the border. Abu al-Laith, a Hamas military commander, claims that the Al-Qassam brigades have retained a weapons stockpile in case truce negotiations fail because, quote, "We have prepared ourselves for a long battle, and we can target Israeli cities that were spared during the war, as well as breach the Israeli border again. We possess more rockets than the enemy thinks we do, and we have used only 10% of our available force," close quote. The Al-Qassam field commander, Abu Jihad, said, quote, "We have prepared a wide array of tunnels 5 to 25 meters deep," that's 16 to 82 feet deep, "which allow our fighters to move about the battleground undetected. It is true that Israel destroyed a number of those tunnels, but the strategic ones are undamaged and have retained their full logistical capacity in as far as available water supply, food, weapons, ventilation systems, and electricity," close quote. Another aspect of Hamas's military capability relies on its use of rockets, which in this war reached all the way to Haifa, northern Israel. In this regard, Hamas official Abu Ali says, quote, "The Al-Qassam brigade started this war right where it left off in the last war. Shelling Sderot, Ashkelon, and Ashdod is now a thing of the past. For this time around, the brigades targeted Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and Haifa, which means that they possess rockets with a range that surprised Israel," close quote. He went on to say, quote, "The Al-Qassam brigades face challenges to manufacture new rockets because materials used to make and develop them are barred from entering the Gaza Strip, while Israel continues to demand that the whole of Gaza be demilitarized. In this regard, Hamas became aware of the disturbing possibility that Israel would win the game of attrition against its fighters by extending the confrontation and causing a shortage in available rockets. But the Al-Qassam brigades anticipated this eventuality and began reducing the daily number of rockets fired while continuing to threaten Israel's home front," close quote. However, the new development in this war is Al-Qassam's infiltration behind Israeli lines and its commando unit attack on Ashkelon's shore positions, 1 kilometer, that's little more than half a mile, north of Gaza's borders. These operations were unprecedented and proved that Hamas troops had undergone advanced training and used new intelligence measures and tactics premised on the element of surprise against the Israelis. In response to Israeli measures to counter such operations, Abu Ali said, quote, Israel's targeting of border tunnels, its deployment of gunboats along the Gaza coast, and its use of surveillance airships and satellites might hinder such operations in the future if a ceasefire agreement is not reached, close quote. But Hamas still has tricks up its sleeves despite their military challenges, and continuing, he said, quote, the brigades did not reveal their full weapons and military capabilities, some of which became known about as battles against Israel progressed. The longer the fighting extends, the more new weapon systems will be used. As such, the Al-Qassam brigades have made the Israeli army aware that the continuation of the war will be met with further surprises. Turning to Islam. The U.S. military conducted new airstrikes against Islamic militants Friday as the IS killed at least 90 male members of Iraq's Yazidi minority in a northern village. They buried Yazidi men alive and kidnapped dozens of women and children. The Yazidis, a Kurdish-speaking ethnic and religious group which numbers in the hundreds of thousands in Iraq, has been persecuted in the north by Islamic State militants, with at least 500 killed last week. It appears residents in the village did not comply with the IS's demands to convert to Islam. The Islamic State, which has declared a Sharia state caliphate in parts of Iraq and Syria, forced tens of thousands of Yazidis and Christians so far to flee their homes or face certain death. Aided by U.S. and Iraqi airstrikes, Kurdish forces on Sunday took back part of Iraq's largest dam from Islamic militants who had captured it less than 2 weeks ago. Recapturing the entire Mosul Dam and the territory surrounding its reservoir would be a significant victory against the Islamic State, which has seized large areas of northern and western Iraq, as well as northeastern Syria. The dam on the Tigris River supplies electricity and water to a large part of the country. By Sunday evening, Peshmerga forces had crossed the Tigris to the broad plains held by the Islamic State. But Peshmerga forces say they haven't yet received any new supplies, and it's not clear how long the U.S. airstrikes will continue. The senior commander said officers of his rank were told that the U.S. had delivered mounted machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades to the Kurdish Defense Ministry, but they had not yet been distributed. And the weapons, while powerful, could not stop the advance of the Islamic State group, which has used heavily armored U.S. Humvees taken from Iraqi troops who abandoned them in June when the militants first swept through the territory. To me, this sounds like a plan to help the Kurds, to make us look like we're doing something, but don't help them enough to give them any success. Make sure the IS succeeds instead. As I reported last week, the IS has been created by countries of the West. This just in. From the Syrian State Department's International Religious Freedom Report for 2013, released just last month, quote, in Syria, as in much of the Middle East, the Christian presence is becoming a shadow of its former self. After 3 years of civil war, hundreds of thousands fled the country, desperate to escape the ongoing violence perpetrated by the government and extremist groups alike. In the city of Homs, the number of Christians dwindled to as few as 1,000 from approximately 160,000 prior to the conflict. Close quote. Meanwhile, for many of Aleppo's residents, electricity has become a luxury, The situation in Aleppo is complicated, my friends. The province is divided between the regime, the rebels, and the Islamic State, with each party controlling part of the electrical grid. Aleppo's main source of electricity used to be the thermal power plant in the eastern countryside, which has been out of service since June 2013 due to malfunctions caused by the battles raging around it. The plant is currently under the control of the Islamic State. Turning to America, a new report reveals that President Barack Obama's administration stopped a shipment of missiles to Israel late last month and tightened weapons shipment procedures to Israel. The Pentagon stepped in and put the weapons transfer on hold. Further, top White House officials instructed various military agencies to consult with the State Department before approving any additional requests from Israel to the defensive operation in Gaza, making various attempts to press Israel into accepting a truce with the adamant terrorist organization of Hamas. Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly responded to this pressure by telling the administration, quote, not to ever second-guess me again, close quote, after Hamas committed one of its chronic ceasefire violations. Currently, a new 5-day ceasefire has come into effect as of last Wednesday at midnight, August 13th, with Obama calling Netanyahu shortly ahead of when it came into effect to push for a sustainable ceasefire. And according to U.S. officials, that Wednesday night phone call between Obama and Netanyahu was particularly combative. So much for America being Israel's best friend. On the home front, since 2006, the Pentagon has distributed to local police departments 432 mine-resistant armored vehicles, more than 400 other armored vehicles, 500 aircraft, and 93,000 machine guns, making use of unused military equipment. And this is despite the fact that violent crime in the U.S. has steadily plummeted. Between 1993 and 2012, the violent crime rate dropped by nearly 50%. So what's this all for? It all seems to have started with an obscure section in a defense bill. In 1990, Congress passed a National Defense Authorization Act with a clause allowing, quote, the transfer of excess personal property from the Defense Department to local law enforcement. Otherwise known as Section 1208. The clause was included in response to the surge of violent crime and the war on drugs in the late 1980s. And it's worth noting that at that time, both chambers of Congress were controlled by Democrats. I'll tell you one thing, my friends, this country no longer resembles anything I knew as a child. It is over with. Turning to London, dozens of pro-ISIS leaflets were distributed in London's Oxford Street on Tuesday, August 12th, urging Muslims to pledge allegiance to the jihadi group and travel to Syria and Iraq. Images were posted by users of Twitter, many by British Muslims angry at the extremist claims made on the leaflets. The leaflets were titled, Khilafah Established, referring to the Islamic State's recent declaration of a caliphate. that is, a political power which would be the legitimate inheritor of spiritual and temporal authority of the Prophet Muhammad. The leaflets state, quote, "The Muslims, with the help of Allah, have announced the re-establish of the Khilafah and appointed an Imam as Khalif," close quote. And they go on to state that Muslims have 7 duties, including a pledge of allegiance to the Khalif, to obey him, and to migrate to the Caliphate. Since the Islamic State's declaration of the Caliphate, more than 3,000 Europeans, including more than 500 Brits, have traveled to Syria and Iraq to fight in radical Sunni extremist groups, including the Islamic State. The distribution of the leaflets in Oxford Street under paper printouts of the Shahada, the Muslim statement of faith commonly adopted by jihadis groups on a black banner as their symbol, is one of the most visible pro-Islamic State demonstrations in Europe to date. Turning to a favorite subject of mine, words. Have you ever heard of Webster's 1828 dictionary? If not, my friends, get one immediately, either from a bookstore or you can go to Webster's Dictionary 1828.com and bookmark it. And don't be fooled by other websites claiming to be Webster's Dictionary 1828. Webster's Dictionary 1828.com is the only one that's accurate and true. As I always teach on my channel here on YouTube, our English Bibles, or Bibles that are translated into any other language from the original Aramaic Hebrew, have been westernized and the messages have been made therefore unclear. They haven't been mistranslated. They've just been made unpure. It's like some illustrations I've made in some of my videos on my word studies. The purest water comes from the mountaintops, the source. And when you translate the Father's Word into any other language, you're making it impure. He says, don't add to or take away from my word. That's a commandment. Well, if you translate his word into any other language, you are immediately taking away from it and adding to it. This same thing has happened with our dictionaries for sure. Well, the Webster's Dictionary 1828, it's amazing. It's pure because it was written with the Father's Word in mind. For example, let me go there. Okay, I'm on Webster's Dictionary, 1828.com. I type in the search for the word truth. And what comes up is, number 1, conformity to fact or reality, semicolon, exact accordance with that which is or has been or shall be. Note right there, this is a scriptural statement. Yahweh, the Aleph and the Tau, the Alpha and the Omega, he who was, who is, and who is to come. That's the scripture. And here, Webster's 1828, exact accordance with that which is, or has been, or shall be. That's in exact accordance with Yahweh, is what the dictionary is saying about truth. And there is no greater truth about that word. It goes on with the truth of history constitutes its whole value. We rely on the truth of the scriptural prophecies. This is in Webster's, my friends. Then it goes on, my mouth shall speak truth, Proverbs 8:7. It starts quoting scriptures. Anyway, go and check it out. You will be Baruch, blessed, beyond words. Bookmark it, get a hard copy in your house. If you use a dictionary, you don't want to ever use any other one than this. And that's the news for this week, my friends. Thank you so much for your support. Until next week, Abba willing, I'll see you then. Shalom, my friends.
Crowded rooms, I need more space than I consume. Enough is time alone with you, underneath a naked moon, sharing confidential moods and making chatter. Mockingbird nocturnal sings notations of eternal things, entering the quantum breeze, flying not for want of wings. He lights his gaze on you and me.